Welcome to the 21st century, an age of medicine, science, and not burning witches, where the Western world has gone almost a century without a catastrophic, deadly plague. Good job, us. Yet as you know, this wasn't always the case. The Roman plagues, smallpox that killed the Native Americans, dank memes, germs have lent an invisible but obvious hand throughout the course of human history. Plagues killing so many people, poor and rich alike, that societies at their core crumbled. Demographics changed, and even empires disintegrated. Nowhere else is this example more prominent than in one of the most infamous plagues ever recorded, the Black Death. A pandemic that ravaged Eurasia during the Middle Ages. The Black Death was so terrifying in its scale, many truly believed the apocalypse was upon them. Can you blame them? In less than a decade, hundreds of millions died across the medieval world, from China to the Middle East and finally Europe, especially in Europe, a continent where the population was cluttered, the cities were growing, and sanitation was atrocious. You're basically lighting a match in an explosion factory. So many died, so many demographics shifted, it truly reinvented Europe, and from the ashes brought it down a path we see today. Without it, who knows where Europe would have been? So, what if the Black Death had never occurred? Say it just never happens. No plague kills millions across Eurasia. Before I discuss this alternate scenario, let's put this into context. There have always been waves of plagues ever since civilization began. The most notable before the medieval era was the Justinian Plague, which killed over 25 million people in the 6th century. The plague, of course, not Justinian. What exactly was the Black Death? Well, we know it was a form of bubonic plague. Bubonic meaning that buboes, basically horrifying welts, pop up across the victim's body. If you got the plague in the 1300s, you would have less than a week to survive. Boils would cover your body, you would vomit blood, dizziness, a slow, painful, and horrifying death. The disease originated from rats, who transferred it to fleas hitching a ride. When the rats died, the fleas would hop off to find the nearest host, who happened to be Jimmy the Peasant. It's believed the disease came from the steppes of Central Asia. Good thing nobody ever comes in contact with Central Asia. Oh. In the 13th century, the Mongols carved their empire across Asia. They didn't purposely spread the plague, well, at least at first. After the pillaging and conquest, the Khan set up a trade network connecting China to Russia and everywhere in between, reinventing the Silk Road and connecting east with west. The plague originated in Central Asia but had already been in China for millennia. However, once this trade was reinvigorated, more merchants traveled across the continent, and with them rats, and with them fleas, all on caravans, wagons, and ships. In the following years, the Black Death would kill and break down anyone across Asia. From the Middle East to China, cities filled with the dead and dying, unable to understand or stop such a horrifying scenario. Soon enough, the fun reached Europe's doorstep. At the time, the Mongols had established a khanate called the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde was sieging the Crimean city of Kaffa when their forces began to suffer from the Black Death. With their army quickly dropping like flies, the Mongols had a pleasant idea. Taking the disease-ridden bodies of their fallen comrades, the Mongols catapulted the carcasses into the streets of the city. In a short amount of time, this medieval act of biological warfare took its toll. The plague brought down Kaffa to its knees, as its citizens died by the masses. Some ships were able to escape, Italian merchants being one of them, sailing to safety across the Mediterranean back home to Italy, bringing with them not only news of the Mongol attack, but unwelcome guests as well. Medieval Europe was a perfect breeding ground for the disease to do its work. Hygiene and sanitation were non-existent. Germ theory was not even theorized yet. Combine this with a disease that kills within the first week, and you're basically playing Pandemic 2 on super easy mode. Within a decade, the disease spread to nearly every part of the continent. Europe would lose over 1/3 to 60% of its population in just 4 years. More than half of the population of London and Hamburg died, half of Paris, thousands in Rome and Venice, and 75% in some cities. So many died across Eurasia, it was faster to bury the bodies in a massive hole by the hundreds. Huge graves to dump the endless stream of new victims indiscriminately tossed into the ground and covered for the next batch. Remember when I said the part about vomiting blood and boils? Multiply this by 100 million across the world. That's the Black Death. So when your friends, neighbors, and family begin to die from mysterious pus boils, how would you react? Blame the Jews. And that's what Europe gone and did. Scapegoats were needed to explain the unexplainable, and since less Jews were affected by the plague for hygienic reasons, 1 + 1 equaled anti-Semitism. Rioters massacred entire Jewish communities, burning down their homes, taking their possessions, lynching them, and forcing their kids to convert to Catholicism. Except the Pope said, hey, maybe you should not kill the Jews who had nothing to do with this, to which the population said, shut up, Pope, and continued as they were. Some Europeans theorized it was God punishing them for their sins, or bad air that was causing people to die. The King of France even believed it was the alignment of the planets. Oh, France. After this 3-year period, over half of Europe lay dead, mostly adults. The kiddies would be killed in a plague just 10 years after. Europe was devastated. Plagues continued to come back in waves for the next few centuries, not completely ending until industrialization. So what if in an alternate timeline, the Black Death simply never happened? Here is one scenario. Now, if I wanted to be extremely detailed, there could be multiple things that could prevent the Black Death from happening, mainly the Mongol Empire never rising. But if I remove the Mongols or any other big event in this alternate scenario, it would butterfly affect this video so much, it wouldn't be a video focusing on the Black Death specifically anymore. So for the sake of time, I'm simply removing the bubonic plague outbreak from this alternate timeline. That doesn't mean the disease doesn't exist, it just means it doesn't spread across Eurasia in the 14th century like it did in our timeline. So it's entirely possible another disease could ravage the continent, but it's doubtful because no pandemic quite compared to the killing power of the bubonic plagues. So in this alternate timeline, it's the 14th century. The Mongol Empire carved up most of Asia, collapsed, and its khanates dot the continent. Europe has continued to live its feudal medieval lifestyle. China still suffers through famine. In our timeline, the stability of the High Middle Ages had slowly begun to end, and overpopulation was becoming a significant problem by the 14th century. Just 2 decades before the Black Death struck Europe, a great famine, called cleverly the Great Famine of 1315-17, created mass starvation across the continent. Royalty even had difficulty finding food. Children were abandoned. Old people forced to starve for the younger. Cannibalism was widespread. The specifics are not quite known, but millions eventually died. Simply put, the population of Europe had gotten too large to support itself. By the time the plague would strike, Europe was already collapsing. Even though it sounds terrible, and it was at the time, the Black Death actually helped Europe. At least 1/3 to half the population died in just 3 years, taking along with it the problems of overpopulation and lack of resources. This meant Europe could actually sustain itself, and bought it enough time to figure out how to manage its resources. In this alternate timeline, the Black Death never occurs, and so this overpopulation problem would never be dramatically solved. Population would continue to grow and then stagnate in the 13th century, yet it remains at the limit. Famines are much more common and devastating, as people compete and die for food. Sorry, Grandma. With more people, that means less food for the average peasant in this alternate world. A terrible harvest results in much more famine than in our timeline. Killing off so many people brought many dramatic effects. In the century following the plague, wages increased, land became cheaper, individuals were needed. In this alternate timeline, this dramatic change doesn't happen. Feudalism needs cheap workers. Less workers means more valuable workers. People the nobles depended on to remain in power died off. Demands were made for higher wages. Peasant revolts became more common. Land left unattended was now up for the taking. Political and social independence was becoming a reality. Laws were made by nobility to keep the lower classes down. However, eventually the system of feudalism couldn't afford to not higher wages, at least in Western Europe. There were just too few peasants to exploit. Serfdom continued in Eastern Europe all the way until the 19th century. In this alternate timeline, feudalism still would have ended, of course. You wouldn't be a peasant living on a farm today, don't worry. But everything in history builds off of each other. If feudalism wasn't dramatically killed off like in our timeline, that means innovations like less restrictive capitalism, early Enlightenment ideas, Renaissance beliefs would be pushed off as well. Europe isn't going to remain medieval for all of eternity, but it does remain stagnated for much longer than in our timeline. Religion itself was transformed by the plague. The Catholic Church as an entity would remain much stronger in this alternate timeline. The Black Death destroyed many people at the time's faith, and not just God, but the papacy itself. To them, they had been devout, good Christians, yet were still punished unfairly in their eyes. The church couldn't offer any answer or solution to the plague, even seeing half of their own clergy die. Any new clergy they brought on was inexperienced or quickly trained to compensate for the lack of priests and monks. This planted a seed of doubt among some of the population. Catholicism was put into question, and this set the stage which would play out in the Protestant Reformation just 2 centuries later. In this alternate timeline, since half of the clergy don't die, the inexperienced never become prominent members. Europe never experiences this rift, and would prolong the eventual split. For Europe, it could be more of the same until the old ways gradually died a slow, painful death. Europe could be unrecognizable to how it is today. Overpopulation means Europe continues to struggle with famine, food shortages, and underpaid lower class for many centuries. With cheap labor, there isn't a need to innovate machines to make up for the lost labor as what happened in our timeline, so farming technology remains behind. Feudalism stays until its slow death, but by then, entirely alternate dynastic marriages and political unions occur. This is simply one scenario out of the countless possibilities. What do you think would have happened had the Black Death never occurred? Say in the comments. This scenario was suggested by Patreon contributor Alex Turpin. Thanks, Alex, for your suggestion. This is Cody of the Alternate History Hub. If you like learning about continents, flags, countries, or anything geography and why that's important, I have an entire channel dedicated to that. Whoa, that's right, Geography Hub. So go check that out.